Just want to welcome everyone again and um, say how excited I am that we are doing these sessions in preparation for Valarie Kaur's visit. And really, this whole idea of bringing her here and creating um, a real spectrum of sponsors for her visit is to try to address the challenges of trying to achieve justice and equity and inclusion in lots and lots of different areas of work that all of us are engaged in. And Saadia and I have been involved in certain projects and causes together. And I've gotten to know some of you doing other kinds of work in other for other causes. But at a certain level, it all comes down to seeing each other as part of one whole community, one whole um, source of strength and unity for humanity. And today's topic, which is a point on Valarie's compass, is fight. And it strikes me that, I feel like I've been doing a lot of fighting recently, and it is a very depleting um,
Mm,
activity,
mhm.
especially at this time when so many of the things that I've been fighting for are things that are not being realized, and in fact are being combated in so many ways. So the idea that we would turn this idea of fight into something that actually becomes a source of strength and motivation and interconnection and and even love, revolutionary love.
Mm.
Because what Valarie says is that when we fight for and alongside people who are not in our immediate circles, that is an act of revolutionary love. It is something that is in our world, in this culture today, kind of countercultural. And so it is such a pleasure to have Saadia here with us today because certainly we have a lot of challenges. I mean, I'm a rabbi and a Jewish woman. Saadia is a Muslim woman, an advocate, and is also in seminary now. And I hope you'll maybe talk a little bit about that. But um, Jews and Muslims spend a lot of time fighting each other. And to think that we can fight together for both of us is a real source of hope and strength and light at this season. And so I'm really delighted that today Saadia Ahmed is with us. And I'm just going to let you talk. You have so many things on your resume. Will you just introduce yourself and talk about the things that you do and that give you hope and meaning in your life?
Sure, sure. And I'm so honored to be here. And I was blessed to join a couple of sessions early on. So I loved hearing the conversation. And I had heard about Valerie Kaur, and I was so thankful that Faith Commons was bringing her because I think there's a difference when you can be in the same space and talk about these things versus, on Zoom or if you're, listening to a recording or her movie. It's just a different experience. And I think it's differently, at least for me. And I'm on the older range of millennials, so I'm sure it's different for Gen Z and other generations. So my work, it actually kind of starts with my grandmother. She is my role model. She's passed away, but she was a force to reckon with. She was in Bangladesh. She was the first woman congresswoman. Like Muhammad Yunus and Grameen Meg, all these things. They were students of hers, and she was all about women's empowerment at a time that wasn't even a term, and especially in a country where women's rights were limited. So I think from a very young age, I mean, at that point she was starting to have some health issues, but hearing about her traveling to China as a state guest for human rights, and getting a gold medal award from Queen Elizabeth for her work in women's development and girls empowerment, and starting schools so that people would have a you know opportunity to get the education they weren't getting and to take them out of homes that weren't safe. And I think that idea of community where we all have a responsibility came really young for me in our home. Um, my mom was always the one that brought home random people from the grocery store for dinner. And we were like, who is this? She's like, oh, she's an international student. He doesn't have anyone here. And he was trying to figure out the grocery store and how he can get halal meat. So I told him to come for dinner. So this is kind of the household I grew up in. There was never a privacy per se. It was always just people coming in and out, in and out. We had a lot of family. I mean, being first generation born American here, we had a lot of family migrating here. So we always had, the cultural elements and then also the neighborhood feel of if something's going on in our community, we all kind of step up because we should. It's not even a question. It should be a responsibility on all of us. So I think that's where my roots come from. I definitely stand on the shoulder of giants. I am very, at the beginning of the work I do compared to the women, especially women, but definitely people in our community that are doing phenomenal things. So my background is in international studies. I did a lot of things with different NGOs. I've kind of been in the nonprofit sector. So right now I'm a nonprofit consultant, specifically for BIPOC-led organizations, because they're not seen in the same way. So I'm trying to empower them and kind of dismantle some of that inequity. And then my passion is really community work as well. So wherever I see a little gap, I feel like, okay, let's come up with a solution. How can we do this as a community and fix some of these issues? And I can't do it alone. None of us can, right? So we got to bring people together. I see, for example, Rabbi Heidi, who is phenomenal, and I adore her. She's one of the women that I've gotten to know through our Daughters of Faith group here in Frisco. And I see a bunch of women of Shreen and a lot of other people that I know that we've worked, Mariam Noor. Lots of sheroes around us, lots of amazing faith leaders and leaders. So I'm just thankful to work with them and do what I can, basically.
That is such a wonderful introduction. And clearly, I mean, this idea of fighting for things that are important for not just for yourself, but for others is something that comes very naturally to you and is part of your heritage. So I just brought a quote. I like to bring some quotes from Valarie's work to kind of give people who aren't as familiar with her work a taste of what she's all about. And she writes that sometimes we fight to protect who or what we love from those who would destroy it. Other times we fight with the ones we love to protect them or ourselves. We must summon the wisdom to discern between threats that are real rather than imagined, and respond in ways that give life rather than deal death. The question, therefore, is not whether or not we will fight in our lives, but how we choose to fight. And I think that, this question of imagining threat in places that it doesn't exist is something that is really, a challenge right now in our world and causing a tremendous amount of anxiety and suffering and misguided action. And I'd love for you, Saadia, to talk. The Muslim community has gotten a tremendous amount of violence perpetrated against it, not just physical violence, in very many ways because of perceived threats. And in fact, Valarie Kaur's work really in the Revolutionary Love began, or she traces it back to right after 9/11, when a Sikh American was mistaken for a Muslim and was the first victim of a hate crime after 9/11. And so I wondered if you would talk a little bit about the toll that misplaced fear and fighting against the wrong thing has been taking in the Muslim community.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we all feel some of that brunt of that hatred, right? Revolutionary love is something we should all just know that that's kind of how it should be, right? And it took Valarie Kaur's wisdom to say, let's highlight this, let's focus on this, let's break this down, let's talk about it. Muslim community definitely has, borne the bore the brunt of a lot of things and a lot of the hatred and the suspicion. I do think you're right in that, and she is right, that 9/11 just changed things, right? I think there was always this suspicion of the unknown and people that look different, and it dates back hundreds of years, honestly, as we know. So it was, whether it's Black people or the Jewish community or the Muslim community or the Hindu community, the Sikh community, I feel like there's always been this kind of hatred and suspicion of, and wondering, okay, if we don't know what they believe and what they do, they must be doing something wrong. That othering feeling, right? So I can even think back when I was a young child. I mean, I was still a kid when 9/11 happened. So it's really shaped and framed the way I think of the community and the world. I mean, I think a lot of what I do is because I saw the things that happened post 9/11. And that sentiment kind of continued through the Muslim ban and other things that have happened, right? We're a reactionary community and we see these things and we're like, oh, this is happening, we need to go fix it, and then everything dies down and we move on to the next thing. And I think it's part of human nature. So I think instilling those values in our community where we have to love one another, which all our religions preach and all our cultures preach, the fact that injustice anywhere, or is a threat to all of our justice. I know so many stories, way too many stories to share today about how the Muslim community has felt like we're not American enough. I myself, I remember when I was younger, I intentionally would feel like I was overcompensating. So my Texan accent would get so strong when I was in a very conservative Republican gathering. And I'm one of those people that was all about going into, gatherings where they wouldn't expect me to be there. Because I was like, this is how we're going to break these, ideas and thoughts and stereotypes that people have. Me being in an echo chamber, preaching to the choir, that's great, makes me feel supported. And my allies make me feel supported. But to do the real work, I need to go where people really need to build that awareness. So I think for the Muslim community, what happened after 9/11 is, although there were injustices before, racism, bigotry was always there. It may have been more about culture, even just looking different. But then it became about an attack on religion per se, and you're not American enough. So then you started seeing slogans like, I am Muslim, I'm an American, I am a Muslim American. I mean, you were hearing these at all these gatherings. I was a small child, so I remember these rallying cries, right? But the beautiful thing was seeing allies step up. And I think for a long time, people were like, oh, I'm not a bigot, I'm not racist, so I'm fine. I think all of a sudden people realize, yeah, that's not enough. I mean, you and your family being okay and understanding the value of diversity is great, but we have to change our community because this is going to affect all of us. So I don't know if I answered your question, but there's been so much, and I'm with you that fight is hard. And I think that's why we have to find support like this group of people that are there to uplift us when we need it, and know that we are there for each other to step up in the community and express that love, because love and fight are very close together, right? We talk about love and hate, but love and fight too. And fight has changed. You're talking about seminary, we were talking about the origins of warfare, and that's a very different time, very different methodology than now. We don't have war like that. We have chemical weapons and massive destruction and governments, right? And doing it out of self-interest. It is not the same thing anymore. So I think for everyday people, our warfare is social media and, community organizing and getting people together and saying, hey, you believe this, but we're encouraging you, inviting you to think differently. So we're not trying to start a war, but I think we definitely have a fight to fight for each other.
Yeah, and that is exactly, I think, what this work gives us a window into, and hopefully some tools to address. Because, I think so often we end up feeling very helpless in the face of injustices and in the face of institutions that have behaved in ways that threaten us and threaten others, and we don't know what to do about it. But what Valarie also talks about is the evolution of warfare. She doesn't talk so much about from arrows and boulders to chemical warfare, but she does talk about physical weaponry, and how we now have tools of engagement like laws and um, sharing of resources and technologies that are not weapon related that we can use. And she talks about having, developing a toolkit, really, the tools for revolutionary love and the tools to be able to fight for revolutionary love. And she talks about having a sword, a shield, and a sacred community. And, I think about some of the things you mentioned, and the sword is really to go and fight for others. And the fact that you were willing to go into places where you were unknown and where you were and that were unfamiliar to you, and put yourself in an uncomfortable situation and stretch your comfort zone to be able to show up not just for you but for others, and to put yourself in at risk to do that is something, that was a sword, that was a tool, right? Your inner confidence to go and do that was a sword. And and then a shield is something that we do to protect ourselves, and that can be appealing to law, or taking a body cam with us when we go to certain places, things like that. And then we have our sacred community, the people that we know that we can rely on to always be with us, standing there with us and supporting us. So you gave that example of going into a place that you didn't know and showing people very visibly that Muslim and Muslim women are not what they might have thought they were. Um, I want to talk a little more about the tools that we have, and to think about how we can all learn from each other's tools and start appropriating each other's tools, or sharing in each other's tools is more probably like it. And also how through using our tools and sharing our tools, we can create that sacred community and expand it.
Yeah, I think for me, the first tool that comes to mind is these partnerships, right? There's amazing organizations, houses of faith, faith commons that are doing wonderful work. And I think sometimes we think that we need to create our own. And I think that is not the strategic way that we should be doing things. And I'm not sure how much we really think about the strategy behind things. There's so much power in doing things together. So I think that's definitely a tool, building those bridges with like-minded people that may not, no one is going to fall in the same place on every topic, right? Like you were saying, Muslims and Jews have a history of fighting about things, right? But there's so much more that we're not fighting about that we all agree about, which is for the greater good, honestly, because, elephant in the room, piece of land overseas does not affect our lives necessarily daily, right? We all want the same things for our families. We all want the same things for our friends, our communities of faith. We want to feel safe, secure. We want to feel that we have the resources to live our best lives. So there's a lot more to agree on and to support each other on. So I think building partnerships among organizations, among communities, I think interfaith relations is so key because our basic tenets are so similar, and especially the Abrahamic faiths, right? So I think what we need to do is to sharpen our swords in a way, and sharpen our toolkits in a way where we are literally taking things to the next level, the conversations, right? I think initially there was a need for these conversations of just, oh, I want to see someone different than me in this room. So I know that, okay, we had a little bit of conversation. I met a Muslim, because I remember that was the biggest thing when I was younger. People are like, oh, 70% of Americans say they've never met a Muslim. I'm like, how did you not meet a Muslim? I'm sure there's someone at your workplace, one of your doctors. I mean, the Muslim community is one of the most educated communities in the country, right? And in the service industry, especially. So I was like, that's pretty impossible. It's just, we're not having any conversations ever because religion is taboo to talk about sometimes, right? But if we're intentional in our lives and we're aware and noticing things, you'll realize there's so many different kinds of people in your life every day that are touching you in some way. So I think those conversations had to go from me dropping a sharing Ramadan basket at your door saying, hey, we're celebrating Ramadan, or hey, happy Hanukkah on my social media, to let's have the hard conversations. Let's talk about the root of some of our differences so we can understand it and still respect each other and know, okay, we don't agree, but I understand what you're saying. And I understand what your perspective is. So I think that's where really the strength lies. And I'm not sure if we've all gotten in there. I know you do amazing work in that, having those conversations that really matter, and they're not surface level and they're not echo chambers. But I think there's a lot of our community that is doing really important work, but we could definitely level it up a little bit, to make a bigger impact. And I think that's where knowledge also comes into place, right? We can learn from each other and then share with our communities and bring our communities together. But we can't do that until we kind of get to understand each other and have that, have the vision to know, okay, these are places that we agree, these are places we don't agree. Nothing should be really off the table, but we don't start with the topics that are the hardest, right? Let's start with these things and get people comfortable, meet people where they are. Because if you go in and you talk about something that is so far from what a person's beliefs is, they're going to shut down. That's just the human thing, right? So I think the emotional intelligence and the building, which Dallas, is doing a great job. I think we just have to level that up a little bit.
Yeah, it strikes me that that a lot of this work has to do with conversation and partnership, and that is labor intensive, right? And I think we get so caught up in doing the work of our individual either organizations or causes, or our immediate community needs, that we sometimes can not just forget, but we don't have the time, we don't have the bandwidth to lift up our head and say, okay, who else is doing this work around me, and how might we be able to amplify what we're doing if we connect with one another. And another way that I think that this is important, and George brought it up in the chat, is, when we look at others and see what they are doing and hear them talk about their work and their faith in different ways, it calls us to ask questions about our own faith and be more reflective about why we do what we do and what about our habits and routines and institutionalized communities of faith and other kinds of communities are essential, and what might we be willing to give up in order to create this beloved community that we are all trying to fight for in a certain way, right? I mean, but that's a conversation that takes a lot of it takes a lot of courage to have that conversation sometimes. I want to open it up because we have so many incredible people and we only have a few more minutes. But if anyone else has a tool that they've used, either a sword, a shield, or a place that they've found sacred community that they might not have expected, that you would want to offer up to the group.
I can get us started on that one as people are thinking. So I gave a shout out to Rabbi Heidi. We have this group, Daughters of Faith, and I think we all know of Daughters of Abraham. And where we live, there is a huge Hindu temple. There is a big Ismaili community. So we realized that not everyone's Abrahamic faith, right? But we wanted to build this almost fellowship sisterhood. Some of the ladies call each other cousins because they're like, we're coming from the same roots. And that's been so beautiful and phenomenal because we pick a theme every month and we actually have discussions about death. What does our religion say about death? And we all understand none of us individually is representing the whole faith. And that's the other thing, right? I think it's easy to say, oh, Muslims believe this or Jews believe this. But the thing is, each of us is on our own journey and our own path, and we take on different parts of our faith, right? So understanding people individually while understanding, okay, generally, these are some of the beliefs and this is what's in the Torah or in the Quran or in the Bible. That has been a beautiful tool to me, because I don't know if we really understood where we're going to go with things, but it's just expanded and people want to be part of it. And you can see the impact in the whole community, actually, even those that are not involved, because they see that this work is going well and everyone feels such a fondness toward each other, that I feel like it's made our community feel more inclusive, just knowing that there is a group doing this work in the community. And there's a lot of pastors' wives, rabbis, lay leaders, but there's some power in food and there's some power in sisterhood. So there's always food from different cultures. And then we talk about that as well, because it brings us together. So
thank you. Maria, were you
Yes.
going to say?
Yes, I can say something. Thank you so much, Saadia, and also Nancy, for sharing on this deep level. And my experience is coming back to 9/11. I work for an organization called the Museum of World Religion, and we created or initiated a series of Buddhist-Muslim dialogues throughout the world after 9/11. And interestingly, this morning I found some articles on internet, which I didn't expect, that were also inspired by what happened at 9/11, where Buddhists really try to grapple with the Muslim insistence on the presence of God, and how they try to find their own in their own tradition, something that could correspond to that, so that the conversation can be deeper. And that's on the academic level, but also in the conversations of people. But my own experience is those dialogues, we had both academic people and then also religious leaders, but we found what is also very effective and important is to involve young people, even to listening to those conversations. And we found that young people pick things up and get really excited. And if they see that the leaders talk to each other, then yes, they naturally already talk to each other. So I think that's one aspect that we should really also be very conscious about. If we organize some things, how can we reach schools even? It doesn't even have to be the university level. And that's just one of the things I wanted to add, to think of how to include young people, even in conversations that may be a little bit beyond their level, and try to adjust it accordingly, but so that they don't feel excluded.
That was such beautiful insight, because I 200% agree with you. I do a lot of work with youth development along with women's empowerment, because I think that's so true, that, we can learn from the wisdom of the generations before us and their experiences, but we have to create the pipeline of uplifting and supporting our youth to be in the work, because none of us know how long we're going to be here, right? And if we're not creating that legacy and that sustainability, then we're going to be in trouble. And I think we see that in all our communities respectively. So I think you're so right that we have to, kind of model the characteristics we want to see, right? That feeling of partnership and compassion for each other, and that togetherness, and that we're a united front against the vices of the world, rather than, oh, Muslims believe this, let's just stay within our community. I think we have to, like, we had an interfaith bonfire with high schoolers of the different houses of faith in the area. And it was so nice because we talked about Jesus. I mean, they don't know where they can ask these questions and talk to people, right? They're like, I don't want to talk to my friend about religion. That's not cool when I'm a 16-year-old boy. But it was amazing to sit there and listen. And, there was a Jewish little boy and he's like, I love Christmas carols, and it was so cute, because that's such a big part of my childhood, even, like the holiday season is huge because we're Americans, right? And some of it is cultural. So I love what you said. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes. And Josh, do you want to say anything about that? Getting stuck in our idea about sacred community? Do you want to?
Sure. I think that we I think we stumble on what constitutes a sacred community. I don't think, because a sacred community is not the same in my thinking. It's not the same as a religious community. It's not the same as a faith community. Somehow sacred community is a much larger umbrella, or a much larger circle. And and so we start using vocabulary like sacred, which is a good word, but I think that for too many people, they associate sacred with something connected to faith and or religion. And I, I don't think that's that helps us. I think that sacred, a community should, especially in the United States, communities ultimately, if we really want to create a broad community has to define itself as it's coming together. It has to define its own sacred. What is sacred to us? There are a group of, there are lots of people who would create a sacred community who probably wouldn't use the word sacred. Maybe they would, but they would have nothing to do with religion or faith. And that if we're trying to, broaden our definitions of community, sometimes I think that we've got to worry a little less about faith and about religion. And we've got to somehow, as it were, transcend those things, because those are inevitably, faith and religion, I think, become barriers. And so when we think of sacred, we've got to think of something bigger than that. Because I was thinking that the sword and the shield and sacred community, and sword and shield and sacred community. Well, the sacred community's got to be much larger than anything that we're currently defining. And that's just my thinking on the subject. And granted, I don't necessarily know how to answer that or how to make that happen, but it certainly, it seems like, I think we stumble in, as we all do, because I do it all the time, just fall into the easy stuff that I know, as opposed to considering what I don't know and going out and finding other people who don't know.
That's so true about what you said. We categorize, right? We categorize a lot of things. And I was in this fellowship, it's called the Glean Shift Fellowship. And it was all about reimagining what faith community means. Because we all see the statistics. There's a vast majority of people, especially under the age of 40 and even in high school, that don't necessarily think of them as religious or part of a faith, but there's a connection, right? There's a spiritual connection between all of us that is way beyond our faiths, in my opinion. But I don't want to monopolize the conversation. Go ahead, please.
Well, I'm going to have to wrap up here, but I want to just say that this is really, it is an important conversation, and it really gets to the heart of what Valarie's all about, because nobody is saying that we should give up our particular communities, right? We get certain things from those communities, and they aren't necessarily communities that everybody should or wants to be a part of, but that's different than a community that is built on the idea of revolutionary love, that we are all, even if we do have different sources of our identities, even because of who we are, where we came from, how we're born, all kinds of history and genetic makeup and other things, that we still can find something about ourselves that we don't yet know when we look at any other person or when we have any other kind of an experience. And it's only through going through these stages and continuing to do it. It's not like you do it once and you're done, or it's even a linear thing. We've talked about wonder, we've talked about grief, and today we talked about fight. All of these are part of building our capacity to see one another as part of ourselves and not part of something alien or threatening. So I'm just going to end our session today by saying that we now are very excited because we have confirmed our venues for Valarie's visit. She will be speaking at 7:30 at Moody Performance Hall on Wednesday evening, February 2nd, and her workshop will take place on Thursday, February 3rd at 11:30 at Paul Quinn College. And you can get more information about that from our website. We are still inviting different organizations and individuals, additional organizations and individuals, to partner with us. That is also available on our website, our partnership toolkit, our sponsorship toolkit. And please come back next week for another workshop. We wish you a very happy week. If you're celebrating Christmas, we will be thinking of you and seeing your lights and thinking of the light that we had from you today, and other holidays and observances, and just being able to celebrate the beauty of our lives is something that we can all take part in. So thank you so much. And we'll stay on for another couple minutes if anybody wants to share anything else.
I just wanted to thank you for inviting me into this space. It was such an honor, and I'm so humbled to be among such amazing leaders. And hopefully, we will get to know each other more one-on-one, because I know all of you have such vast experience and insight that I could definitely learn from. So I look forward to that, and thankful to you, Nancy, for putting this together on the Faith Commons team.
Well, and I neglected to thank you, Saadia. You added so much to our conversation today. And I know that we will get to know each other better and continue these conversations and help all of us to become. I mean, this group right here is a sacred community. We just shared something that was different, that was not the usual, and that was something that we can look to as a source of strength and agency when we're wondering, you know, where do I have the tool, the strength, the ability to make a change? Well, all of us are here together, trying to do that together, and we all support one another.
Absolutely. One community, right? We've got to stay united on some fronts. But I do think it was interesting. One thing you touched on, that I feel like there is this sense of competition sometimes, and even within the same faith communities. And I'm talking about faith communities specifically, not necessarily one religion, but just because that is kind of how we've segmented things in the past in the work that I do sometimes. I do think, sorry, let me get your name, Joshua. Joshua is very correct in that faith can be limiting, but it depends on our intention and how we want to look at it, right? If we want to use faith to categorize people or ethnicity to categorize people, we're not really getting to know anyone, right? The conversation is not happening, and we're not recognizing that, each person is an individual. And I think that's where we get lost sometimes. We want to just say, okay, so-and-so represents this community, but the thing is that person cannot represent the whole community 100%. So if something you hear, and I'm always very hesitant when I say things, as you can tell, I'm not an introvert, but there are some times that I'll get in a discussion with someone and I'll tell them, listen, you have a lot more knowledge than I do. You may have more knowledge about my faith and what we believe about that topic than I do, because you've sat and done the research. But I can tell you what I represent and what I believe. And, it may not represent everybody in my faith group. So I think that's something to remember when we go into these conversations, that, I see a lot of intersectionality between, Black Muslims. So they've got the African-American fight, the Black fight, the social justice fight, and then they're Muslim too. And then a lot of times it's women, and there's so much that they're fighting. And I have to tell them sometimes, like, I don't know what to do for you. I don't know what to say. I'm so sorry, but tell me how I can help you, right? Because that friend of mine may have a different struggle than another Black Muslim woman friend of mine. So I think we just need to get at that level. Yeah.
Thank you for that.
No.
Yes, that's so real and so important to remember. And, in being in our own communities, the intention is not to be exclusionary, even though it is not inclusive of everyone. It is not, if your intention is to use that time in a particular setting to identify things that will help you out in the world with, things that are less familiar and less comfortable. That's really the test of our faith and our faith community. Well, thank you again, everyone, and we hope to see you next week. And please spread the word to others. And we'd love to get some young people too, if anybody has connections to help us expand our reach. So, and to teachers even. So, thank you so much. See you next time.